Hello, welcome to the KASB Daily State House Update for January 13th. I guess I'm just thinking in my head, it's only the third day of the session, but a lot is happening. So we're going to try to hit these things real quickly. Number one, I'll start with the release of the governor's budget recommendations today to a joint meeting of the House Appropriations, Senate Ways and Means Committee. From probably a school viewpoint, the big takeaway is the governor is fully funding the base state aid amounts that were approved under Gannon and all of the ancillary equalization costs like LOB, et cetera, that would go along with that. It's important to note that there's actually some savings or reduction to the levels that have already been approved for the current year and next year because of some decrease in enrollment. So the governor is funding the base, but because weighted enrollment is somewhat down, that there is actually the system is costing less than was originally intended. There's also some savings in capers because of some steps the governors took. We're going to explain all this in a lot more detail. I think that's the big takeaway. The upshot of the governor's plan is to end up with a 7.5% ending balance at the end of next year, and next year's the budget they're working on, and that's what state law is supposed to require. But there's going to be some pretty controversial steps to get there. The governor's again pushing for re-amortizing capers, which the simplest way to explain that is paying off the debt longer, which just like if you amortize your house or refinance credit cards or something like that, you can save money year to year, but you pay more in the long run. The governor's arguing we need the flexibility now. The last 2 years, the legislature has balked at that additional cost. The governor's also recommending using some increased taxes from basically things like internet and virtual sales. I think you're going to tell us a little bit about that, Leah. That's part of her plan. Not paying back some borrowed idle funds money, which has been a point of contention. We paid some of that back. She wants to delay that over 10 years. And then finally, the legislature took in more money than we expected this year, and it was put into kind of a special reserve fund, about $82 million there, and the governor wants to transfer that out. So to fully fund schools, to have a 7.5 ending balance, and to do some of the other increases that are provided in the budget for human service caseload, state employee pay, some things like that, you got to take some steps that are likely to be controversial. So we're going to be hearing more about that in the next few weeks, but that's the top line levels. Any reactions, guys?
Well, given the makeup of the legislature, I'm sure these are not going to be too well received. And of course, the Republicans have an agenda to cut taxes in a way that the governor doesn't. So we'll be fighting over that ending balance bottom line, I guess, toward the end of the session.
I think that's right. I think the big issue is going to be that ending balance, and I think right behind that is going to be questions about the increase in school funding, which again is sort of an artificial increase next year. But the fact that school funding has been going up because of Gannon, ballpark terms, about $100 million a year, as other agencies have been cut back, as we're still dealing with a lot of economic problems, that's certainly going to draw some scrutiny. So that was kind of my morning. Guys, what did you see this morning before we hit the afternoon real quick? Leah, you're muted.
Okay. I didn't know if Scott was going to go. Scott, do you want to cover the state board, or you want me to cover committees?
Okay, I'll do a quick wrap up of the state board. They met this morning and kind of neat. They heard from they had a discussion with a group of students, student leaders over Zoom. And these were leaders of like career student organizations like FFA and DECA and things like that. And the board was very interested to hear, how's remote learning going? How's hybrid learning going? That kind of thing. And the students, I thought, had some really good suggestions. Basically, they focused on, they said it's important for schools to help students stay connected, like even maybe getting together a buddy system so that, there are students that are motivating each other. And they said, especially there were a few students from extremely rural areas, and they said broadband and solid internet connection is crucial. Some students were talking about how when the wind blows, their connections suffer, and I think the wind does blow quite a bit in Kansas. So, but it was interesting stuff, and I think it was just good to hear from students on how they're kind of persevering through this time.
Well, I spent my morning, as Mark mentioned, in a couple of committees. Senate Tax did kick out SB 13, which is kind of the truth in taxation, or the tax transparency bill. They kicked that out to the full floor. That does not affect schools at this point, but it basically says if you're a local entity other than a school district and you want to raise your taxes beyond a revenue neutral level, you have to publish that intention and give folks time to protest that. And you might recognize that it's very similar to what school districts do every year when they publish their budgets. You publish it and then you have a hearing. And so at this point, school districts are not covered by that bill. And I didn't hear anything today that led me to think that they had any interest in looping school districts in on that bill. Of course, you never know what could happen on the floor. So we'll continue to track that for you as that goes through the process.
Leah, before you hit
Yes.
the other bill, really important to understand, as we stress over and over, because the concern is always, well, how come schools aren't covered? To remind people that, your school leaders, your budgets are already limited by what the state allows under base state aid,
Right.
or the cap on the local option budget, or the cap on capital outlay dollars, or the fact you have to vote to approve a bond.
Yeah, your LOB or your LOB increase, or
local units don't have any of those procedures except the tax lid, which is
removed by the bill.
So it isn't just like, oh, we're not doing anything for schools. We've just tried to point out you're already under kind of a different set of limits and notice requirements, and there's a lot of factors in with equalization, and I think legislators understand that, and that's why schools have not been included. So sorry about that. Go on.
No, that's good. Good embroidering there, Mark. There was a bill introduced today, no bill number yet, but as Mark kind of alluded to earlier with the discussion of the governor's budget, it's called the Market Facilitators Bill. It would require groups that are market facilitators. The easiest one to explain is a company like Amazon that does not charge sales tax on goods, would require them to charge sales tax on those things that we order from Amazon or those other online sellers to recoup some of that sales tax money that is being lost. And that's been quite an issue over the past several years. We recently had the Wayfair Supreme Court decision that kind of paved the way for this. And this would have a positive impact on the state revenue and the ending balance. And so that bill was introduced today. As I said, no bill number yet, but that was introduced today in Senate Tax. Also in Senate Tax today was the introduction of Senate Bill 22, which, if that is giving you PTSD, yes, that's the GILTI and the decoupling bill. That bill was hotly debated in the legislature in the past, and even under that, actually, it's kind of a coincidence, it's the same bill number, Senate Bill 22. So that's been reintroduced this year, would decouple us from the federal code, allow folks to itemize in certain instances. And in a little addition that's key for this year and the crazy times we live in, you would not have to pay income tax on any unemployment compensation that was credited to you because of a fraudulent claim. So if somebody stole your ID and somehow that unemployment compensation got credited to you, you wouldn't have to pay income tax on that. So those bills were introduced in Senate Tax today. And then Senate Judiciary did push out Senate Bill 14, which is the extension of the legislature's COVID emergency response from basically January 26th of this month through March 31st of this year to kind of extend the emergency declarations that are currently in place until the end of March, to give the legislature time to, as was said repeatedly today, take a deeper dive into some of the deeper issues around responding to a statewide emergency such as a pandemic, as opposed to, you know, a tornado or a flood, kind of a short-term thing. Those needs were exposed by this statewide pandemic that is continuing. And so while the legislature, you know, takes a deep dive on that, they have kicked the Senate Bill 14 out to the floor to hopefully get that passed, they hope, rather quickly, in order to extend, as I mentioned, the emergency declarations and some of those things through the end of March. So speaking of quick, there was some pushback from Democrats on both of those committees today about how quickly things are moving, and especially new folks, you know, who said, you know, I haven't had time to read this, and the Republican committee chairs were pushing right back, and they were not brooking any opposition to their rushing these bills to the floor. They said they don't know how much longer we're going to be able to stay in session due to the pandemic, and we need to get these done. So polite, but sometimes contentious today.
Both bills you followed, we just got notice, I did
Yeah.
anyway, are scheduled for general order debate tomorrow. So
Right.
they're really moving very quickly.
Yes.
Just a couple things before we wrap up. I would note the Senate Education Committee today received the legislative post-audit study on cash balances. You may remember that audit really kind of explained why districts have them. They indicated that balances have increased, but mostly in restricted funds, which are kind of limited to purposes like bond payments and things like that. Some questions from the committee, but there really were the post-audit didn't really find any fault or make any recommendations, and basically said, you know, it's very subjective what's too high or not high. And right now we let local boards do that. So we'll have to see if there's any follow-up action on that. I think we're going to wrap up now pretty quickly because there's some 3:30 committees that we may look at, but none are expected to take any action. We'll be back tomorrow afternoon, and be sure to check your KASB calendar tomorrow. We've been getting during the day and tonight the schedules for hearings next week, so we'll have a better sense of what the second week of the session will look like.